From eerie encounters in the dead of night to inexplicable disappearances, these stories will challenge your perceptions of reality and the great unknown. Buckle up as we embark on a captivating exploration of 3 compelling alien abduction cases that defy explanation. Christa Tilton. Christa was an ordinary woman living an ordinary life in suburban America in the 1980s. Little did she know her world was about to be turned upside down by a series of terrifying encounters with extraterrestrial beings. It began in July 1987 when Tilton was home alone, when she suddenly felt an overwhelming sense of disassociation and disorientation. Before she knew what was happening, she felt herself being dragged forcibly from her bed by an unseen force. The next thing she recalled was finding herself inside a strange circular vehicle, presumably a spacecraft of extraterrestrial origin. Standing next to her was a humanoid figure who wordlessly handed her a glass filled with clear liquid. After drinking it, Tilton felt her faculties return and the foggy feeling left her mind. Now lucid, she took stock of her bizarre surroundings. The humanoid gestured for her to follow and led her out of the craft. Tilton found herself standing atop a darkened hill, the night sky above dotted with stars. Squinting into the blackness, she could just make out the mouth of a cave open at the base of the hill. As her eyes adjusted to the dark, she noticed 2 figures approaching. Both were dressed in crimson jumpsuits like fighter pilots and carried firearms on their hips. Apprehensively, Tilton followed as the figures made their way towards the cave. As they drew nearer, she noticed a dim light emanating from within, confirming her suspicions that this was more than just a simple cavern. Stepping inside, the tunnel stretched onward into the earth, lined with strange lights spaced at regular intervals. At one point they came across what seemed to be a security checkpoint, guarded by another armed man in red. Surveillance cameras tracked them as they passed through a large reinforced door. On the other side, Tilton's group boarded a small transit vehicle, which took them deeper into the subterranean complex. When they disembarked, Tilton was directed to stand on a scale-like device fitted with a computer screen. Her height and weight were scanned, and she was issued an ID card, though his purpose was unclear. By now, her anxiety was rising by the second. She pleaded with the man in red to tell her where she was and why she was brought there, but he remained cryptically silent. The complex was clearly massive, extending far into the depths of the earth. At one point they entered an enormous elevator capable of holding numerous people. Tilton's guide informed that this was only the first level and they still had far to descend. When the elevator doors opened next, Tilton found herself staring down a long, sterile hallway, lined with rooms filled with banks of computers and electronic equipment. Yet despite the well-lit corridor, she could discern no actual light sources. It was as if the whole tunnel was illuminated from within the walls themselves. As Tilton took in her surroundings, she froze in shock. Turning a corner, she came face to face with a group of beings she could only describe as extraterrestrial. Small in stature with jet black almond-shaped eyes, their appearance matched commonly reported alien encounters. They appeared to be busy working on a set of small, flying saucer-shaped crafts. Hustled back to the elevator by a guide, Tilton descended further into the earth, this time to level 5. As soon as she stepped out, she was gripped by an ominous feeling of dread. Her intuition screamed that this floor contained terrors beyond imagining. Noticing her panic, the man in red assured her that no harm would come to her as long as she remained by his side. Down a series of corridors, they walked past rooms lined with large glass tanks and tubes. Something moved inside the containers, but Tilton could not make out what it was. At one point, the man wrenched her away and they continued walking. The urgency of his movements filled Tilton with dark foreboding. Eventually, they arrived at a clinical laboratory filled with grey-skinned extraterrestrials. Tilton observed the creatures working closely alongside human scientists and doctors. The room was filled with ominous-looking medical equipment and machinery. At the command of one of the doctors, Tilton reluctantly took a seat on an examination table, resisting the urge to flee. Sensing her fear, the doctor attempted to reassure her, but his words carried an undeniable undertone of threat. As she submitted to the examination, the room seemed to grow icy cold around her. Trembling, Tilton closed her eyes, slipping into unconsciousness. When she awoke, she found herself in excruciating pain, realising she had just been subjected to an intrusive and traumatic medical procedure against her will. Her screams were cut short when one of the doctors sedated her. Mercifully, she soon sank back into oblivion. Tilton felt only rage at having been so violated. She lashed out verbally at her captors, but they remained indifferent to her distress. She was tersely informed that her ordeal had been necessary and that she would do well to forget it entirely. Before leaving, the man in red hinted ominously that she might be summoned to return again in the future. On the way out, Tilton was paraded past rows of tubes housing human men and women suspended in a lifeless state. Elsewhere, she saw containers of animals also in some sort of lifeless state. The scope of the vast underground operation filled her with despair. In the end, Tilton was led back to the same craft that had deposited her here, and found herself returned to her home with no conscious recollection of how she got there. But try as she might, she would never truly be able to forget the horror of her experiences that night. She had glimpsed a shadowy world that existed just below the surface of our mundane human existence, and nothing would ever be the same. In the coming years, Tilton would undergo extensive hypnotic regression therapy in an attempt to restore her memories of that lost night. The sessions will unlock repressed recollections of her journey deep into a secret underground base, staffed by a malevolent alliance between humans and extraterrestrials. Piece by piece, Tilton would reconstruct an account of incomprehensible experiments and violations performed on unwilling victims like herself. Her chilling testimony would come to be corroborated by others like her. Fellow experiences of a dark phenomena that much of the world is totally unaware of. Mara Hansen. Like Christa Tilton, Mara Hansen is another ordinary woman who found herself caught up in the disturbing world of alien abduction. For Hansen, however, her encounters with extraterrestrial forces were not limited to a single incident, but recurred frequently throughout her life. Hansen's first brush with the unknown took place in 1957, when she was 16 years old. Driving home with her older sister after a school dance, the pair saw an intensely glowing UFO hovering above the deserted road ahead. After watching the saucer-shaped craft shoot straight up into the sky, the sisters realised 3 hours had passed with neither having any memory of what had transpired. Under hypnosis years later, Hansen would recall being taken aboard the luminous UFO and subjected to a medical examination by small alien creatures with oversized bald heads and wraparound eyes. This abduction experience in her teens was just the beginning of a lifetime of extraterrestrial interference. 9 years later, in 1966, Hansen had a second fully conscious encounter with alien beings. While staying in a remote cabin, she saw a hat-shaped UFO land silently outside in the snow. 3 child-sized humanoids with grey skin and bulbous heads entered the cabin and levitated Hansen, paralysed above her bed. Telepathically conversing with her, they explained they meant no harm and were simply curious about human life. Over successive decades, Hansen continued to experience UFO sightings and alien visitations. Repeatedly, she would be taken by the diminutive extraterrestrials to their vessel and subjected to physical examinations. She also reported episodes of missing time and wakened to discover mysterious nosebleeds and other unexplained injuries. During one intense period of activity in 1993, Hansen awoke one morning to discover a fresh surgical incision behind her earlobe. Under hypnosis, she uncovered memories of alien experimenters inserting an implant into her head through the incision against her will. Like others who have undergone similar experiences, Hansen came to believe the aliens were observing and assessing human physiology for reasons unknown. She conjectured that the ability to paralyse her and erase her memories meant they had mastered advanced technological methods for manipulating the human nervous system. By the late 1990s, Hansen's encounters tapered off, though she still firmly believes she was repeatedly abducted by visitors not of this earth. Her chilling accounts led credence to a disturbing phenomenon that violates human sovereignty in the name of a shadowy alien agenda. Hansen's story parallels dozens of others, everyday citizens plucked from their routines to serve on subjects in an otherworldly program beyond their comprehension. Judy Dor. Judy Dor, a resident of Texas, joins the ranks of those whose alleged tales of alien abduction share eerie similarities with the experience reported by Christa Tilton and Mara Hansen. On the night of May the 29th, 1973, Judy Dor and her young daughter were resting in a secluded cabin in the Texas Hill County outside Houston. Dorothy's husband was away on business, leaving the two alone. According to Dorothy's account, their evening took a bizarre and terrifying turn sometime after midnight. Awakened by a sound outside, Dorothy went to peer out the window. In the darkness you could make out a glowing object, slowly descending from the night sky towards a clearing by the creek behind the cabin. As she watched mesmerised, an entryway opened in the side of the object, and three odd-looking creatures began making their way towards the cabin. Dorothy's daughter came up beside her to see what was happening. Suddenly, both found themselves unable to move, as if frozen in place by some unseen force. As the beings approached the cabin and entered through the front door, Dorothy blacked out. When she came to hours later, Dorothy felt herself being dropped roughly into her bed. Disoriented and terrified, she turned to check on her daughter, who seemed traumatised but unharmed. After sunrise, Dorothy hurriedly packed up their belongings and drove back to Houston, unsure of what exactly had transpired. Under hypnosis weeks later, the traumatic memories came flooding back. Dorothy recalled being levitated onto a table inside the glowing craft, where she was subjected to a painful physical examination by the inhuman entities. The creatures had bald, oversized heads and ebony, almond-shaped eyes that chilled Dorothy to her core. She remembered screaming and struggling to no avail. Dorothy's case invites comparisons with numerous other reported abductions. Like Hansen and Tilton and countless more, she described a profoundly violating experience at the hands of alien beings possessing advanced technology enabling them to immobilize and subjugate human subjects. Dorothy's account lends further credence to a disturbing phenomenon that continues to traumatize ordinary citizens.